wonder why the Super Bowl is a hotbed of sex trafficking, and meanwhile, we applaud for literal pole dancing during the Super Bowl halftime show. Make no mistake, degrading women has tragic cultural consequences. For anybody who did not watch the halftime show last night, I'm not going to show the video to you because kids and families watch my show. But this is what happened. J-Lo and Shakira performed. J-Lo's act was a striptease on a stripper pole, partially nude, with a camera shot zooming up between her legs as she rubbed her crotch. What message is that supposed to send to little girls? That our bodies are commodities? Hey, little ladies, if you exploit your sexuality, you'll be successful. Do we want to tell young ladies that we women are nothing more than thrusting and gyrating in skimpy clothes intended to arouse men? That our bodies are sexual objects and our sexuality is currency? That is not women's empowerment. That is exploitation of women, demeaning women to mere objects, degrading the beauty of female sexuality. And what message was this performance supposed to send to young men? How are we supposed to expect men to respect women when we teach them to applaud for women portrayed as sex objects? Might as well take the kids and all the young preteen boys who watch the Super Bowl to the strip club at halftime. Female empowerment. And I don't want to hear it from all the people flooding my social media today with excuses, saying, what do you want, women wearing burqas? And you're a racist, and it's not degrading if she chose to do it. Complete load of BS. You are the one objectifying her, regardless of whether she's objectifying herself, which she was. Her lack of respect for her own body doesn't justify your lack of respect for her. And if you think that this criticism is new because the performers were Latina, have you been living under a rock? Beyonce's performance was not family-friendly. Madonna's performance was not family-friendly. Janet Jackson's performance was sure as heck not family-friendly. And even Adam Levine's performance last year was not family-friendly. Women are not objects. It's time we as a culture stopped treating women as such. This is not a left or a right issue, a conservative or a liberal issue. It's a cultural crisis when even 70% of Christian men watch pornography. If you are so desensitized to what's degrading to women that you're defending this halftime show as being totally fine and appropriate, then maybe it's time for a heart check because you might be part of the cultural problem. Degrading women to mere objects leads to treating women as sexual commodities. And look at what happens outside the Super Bowl: sex trafficking. By the way, where is the outcry from feminists who claim they fight against the sexual exploitation of women? I got a message last night from a survivor of human trafficking who said she was angry and upset to see the NFL promote a performance so degrading to women. The NFL claims to care about domestic violence against women. The NFL claims to care about human and sex trafficking.
Well, welcome to Christ and Culture. This is Jeff Short. Glad to have you along for the journey today. Today we're going to be talking about what a lot of people are talking about, and that is this year's Super Bowl. Now, the actual game itself was a very good football game. It was close up until the very end. And so you had a really good competition between the teams. And I'm glad I watched the Super Bowl. I watched it with the family. And everything went great as far as football goes. Now, the halftime, though, is what a lot of people are talking about. And a lot of people, rightly so, are offended by what they saw. But the question you have to ask yourself is, wouldn't you expect a Super Bowl halftime show to be degrading, corrupt, lewd, and all of the other negative things that you would think of that we've seen in the past? Yes, you would expect that. So wouldn't you want to just turn it off right away after the end of the second quarter? Yes, you would. And that's what the plan was at my house. And that's what we did. We turned it off. We turned the football game off and went to, in our case, we watched the Puppy Bowl, or I think it was the Kitty Bowl, where they had some cats and they had some cats playing on a football field. And it was kind of a neat thing. But of course you would expect a Super Bowl halftime to be filled with all kinds of degrading and corrupt entertainment. And it was this year, just like it has been in the past. I remember the year, I think it was 2004. I think it was 2004. It could have been 2003, where it was 2004, I believe, one of those 2 years anyway, where they had a football game. There was a big church group that had a church football gathering for the Super Bowl party. And I was watching it along with the group. And halftime came. I walked out, did something else. Why? Because the halftime shows have become almost this competition to see who can be the most corrupt, see who can have the most out there, edgy, talked about thing imaginable. And it's that way, and it's been getting that way for years and years and years. There might be a few different formats a couple years in a row, but then it goes back to that same downward decline of corrupt entertainment. And so I stepped out of the room, and that was the year with the famous Janet Jackson wardrobe malfunction. Of course, they're going to do stuff like that. And they've had Madonna on there. They've had Lady Gaga. They've had Beyonce. It's a big, almost like a cabaret bar dancing format, and they've had that for many, many years. And so if you're watching the football game, you might as well, if you're a Christian, you just plan on turning the halftime show off. Don't even wade into that, because you're going to be upset, you're going to be shocked, you're going to be offended, you're going to be outraged, you're going to be really bothered by what you see because of the corruption and the decadence that is settled into our culture. And this year's Super Bowl was no exception. They had all of the typical corruptions that you would imagine. There was Jennifer Lopez and another female singer, dancer named Shakira, and they put on one of the most immodest, most corrupt, most licentious dance moves performance that the Super Bowl has ever seen. And of course, they're going to do that because then they get talked about. And they get a lot of publicity and they get a lot of attention. And that's probably why they're out there dancing in the first place. They wanted a lot of attention. And so they did that. They got that. They had some of the most immodest, immoral, sexually charged, exploitative of women, objectification of women that the Super Bowl has ever put out. Now, the problem is, like I said before, this is getting worse and worse and worse every year. It's the corruption of our culture. Our culture, the Western culture, is becoming more and more corrupt. And so if you're going to watch this kind of stuff, you're going to become more and more outraged. So why would you even want to do that? Why would you want to tune in to the halftime show? I know some people tune in because they want to cover it. I didn't see the halftime show. I heard about the halftime show. And what I heard about it and what I heard described was enough for me to know I don't want to watch these Super Bowl halftime shows. The Bible talks about, I will put no unclean thing before my eyes. I don't want to put that kind of garbage, that kind of filth in front of my eyes. And I especially don't want to have young children, family members gathered around the television watching a football game, and then all of a sudden, without warning, here's a halftime show that looks the same as you might imagine some kind of stripper bar. And as the reports indicated, Jennifer Lopez actually used a pole, and she was what they call pole dancing. And this is used at these stripper bars all the time. And she was doing that in front of everyone at the Super Bowl, at the stadium. Thousands and thousands of people, men, women, their children, the teenagers, they all come there to watch a game. And then in front of millions and millions, one of the most watched television events of the year. It's all over the world, all the armed forces. It's broadcast in Europe. It's broadcast in Africa. It's broadcast in Asia. It's broadcast everywhere. It's covered the entire world, Latin America, South America, Central America. It's everywhere. This is probably the most watched event in television every year. And here is a strip show being played out in front of the eyes of millions upon millions, perhaps even 1 billion people watched it. I don't know the statistics. But children, family members, why? Because it gets you pulled in because of the football game. It's the biggest game of the football season, and football's big, and it's promoted everywhere in the world. And so if you're a father, you bring your sons, you watch a football game, you see a good game. It was a good game. There's no question about it. It started out and it looked like one team was going to win, but then the other team came back and did a great comeback. And it was a great football game as far as sports goes. And that's what it's about. That's what it's about, the sports. But the problem is you start watching a football game and then all of a sudden you're watching a strip show. You start watching a good, clean sporting activity and all of a sudden you're inside a stripper bar and you're watching a woman pole dance and sensually dance, much like we can imagine Herodias danced in front of King Herod, sensually seducing him into granting her any wish she wanted. She chose to beheaded John the Baptist in prison. We know that from the New Testament. But that kind of sensual dance, that was then inserted into a sporting contest. It was put in the middle of this football game. And this is the corrupting of our culture, because all of a sudden you're watching something and all of a sudden then you have something else entirely different inserted. And that's what happens in our culture as we see the corruption of our culture more and more and more. This happens also in commercials. This happens all the time. You're watching, especially sports nowadays, you're watching sports and all of a sudden there's a boom, goes to a commercial, and then there's some half-naked lady dancing or gyrating in front of the screen or showing off a lot more than is modest, and then it goes back to the sporting event, and all of a sudden you've been corrupted. And how do you hide your children? How do you hide your family from that without warning? There's no warning that says, now warning, we're going to show women who are almost naked dancing around, gyrating and sensually accentuating parts of their body, and then using a pole to dance to, and all kinds of twerking and all kinds of different things that are lewd and lascivious. We're going to show that. So just little children, be aware. Now they do that with violent content. News reporters say, okay, this video clip is going to show some disturbing pictures. You might want to hide your eyes or look away or get the children out of the room because we're going to show some very violent photographs or film. They warn you before they do this. There was no warning at the Super Bowl. There was no message that said, warning, there are going to be 2 nearly naked women dancing sexually and sensually like you might see or imagine in a strip club. If you have children, impressionable teenagers, people who will be offended, please leave the room. They didn't do that. They purposely segued right into a striptease show, a burlesque show. And this is how the culture desensitizes us. And it's also part of the whole process of assaulting the Christian values of our nation. You attack them, but then if someone objects to what you're doing, then you say, well, you're criticizing those women, you must be misogynistic. If you criticize them because, what they were doing was clearly immodest, clearly inappropriate. But if you're criticizing them, you're racist because they're Latino and you're criticizing them. And it's a racistic remark, or it's a sexist mark, or you're just some misogynist, or there's criticism of you for objecting. Now, one of the most lame things that I saw in reaction to this was I tuned in to a newscast at Fox News, of all places. Fox News. So you might think there might be some pushback as to what was going on out there because it's not a family-friendly experience. It's a very shocking and disturbing and offensive thing to have two women stripping in the middle of your living room, and you didn't tune in for that. You tuned into a football game. So that's offensive. That's shocking. So you go to Fox News, and they have, in the morning, they have a man and a woman and another man. So 3 people. The topic comes up, the Super Bowl, the next Monday morning. And the woman starts saying, yeah, that was fantastic, wasn't it? They're really in shape, and just positive, affirming, just praise for these 2 dancers. Totally tone deaf as to the issue involved. Just affirming them. And then when the children, actually Jennifer Lopez, one of the lewd dancers, she actually had the nerve to bring out her 2 daughters. I think it was her 2 daughters, or maybe 1 daughter. It was her daughters came out and were singing with her in the midst of this. So in other words, she's not only corrupting millions of people in their homes, she's bringing her small daughters, I don't know how old they were, but they weren't very old, into the midst of a barroom dance extravaganza. It's just totally out of moral bounds. And the Fox News lady commentator was, oh, that was so sweet when her daughters came out. Wait, did you miss the whole context? Did you miss the whole thing? Are you naive enough to think that this is okay? Or are you just being politically correct or polite and not wanting to be negative or critical about anything? Yes, you're allowed to be critical and negative if something is corrupting the young people of our nation, if it's corrupting the morals of our nation, if it's pornographic, you're able and you should be critical of it. You don't have to be polite then. You don't have to be positive. You don't have to say praise things, and you don't have to affirm them. It's not great. But she went right along and just thought it was just great that they just did a great job dancing. Wow, it's incredible how all the moves that they could do. Yeah, you could say the same thing for the corner bar down the street. It's amazing how those striptease dancers are so flexible and how they can move about and how much in shape they are. Yeah, you could say the same thing for a stage show, for a pole dancer at a corner bar. Yeah, they're really in good shape. That's why they're there. That's why they're on exhibition. That's why they're shaking their booties, if you want to put it that way. And this Fox News commentator woman was so tone deaf about the whole moral issues involved. It's scary. And that's the way a lot of people are. especially when they have to make comments in public. They don't want to come across as critical. Also, they may think, well, the majority of the people think it's pretty good, so I better be in line with that, or else I will be criticized for criticizing. There's a fear that you will be criticized. But as Christians, we need to be able to be like the little kid when the emperor clothes, the story of the emperor clothes, he goes by and he's naked, but he's been convinced that it's perfectly okay. And finally, it takes a little kid to say, hey, mommy, the king is naked. You need somebody to expose the truth, in other words. And we need to expose the truth. We need to say, whenever we're asked, this is corrupt filth. This is polluted entertainment. This is inappropriate to the nth degree. There's no question about it. It's inappropriate. It's inappropriate. That's why they don't let little kids into strip bars to see the strip shows. It's inappropriate for kids. It's inappropriate for everybody, actually. And that's why these strip bars are usually not next to schools and next to places that are respectable, because they're not respectable. They're usually pretty dingy places. They're usually pretty cheap. They're usually pretty bad. It's a bad scene there, usually. And that's why. Because it's something you want to be ashamed of. It's something you want to hide yourself from. And that's why these guys kind of sneak in there in the dark and then they sneak out. Because this is not something you want everybody to see, because you know it's wrong. You know it's guilty. You shouldn't be staring at a half-naked lady gyrating sexually in front of you. Now, yes, there is a lot of peer pressure to say, oh, that's great. She did a great job. Now, what was the response of Jennifer Lopez to the whole thing? You know, her message was, well, people need to be free to be what they are and who they are and do what they want to do. In other words, just live and let live. If you don't like it, you don't have to watch it. That's true. If you don't like it, you don't have to participate in it. That's true. And I would say that to people who are outraged and upset about it and offended by it, but they still just sit there and watch it. Why? Why would you do that? Know every year, right on beforehand, every year, before you get to Super Bowl halftime, just tune it off. Just turn it off. Or tune to another channel. Or watch something else. Or go in and get something to eat and take a break and come back a half hour later and resume the football game. You just know you're going to do that, all right? If you're a church group and you've gathered people together, some kind of evangelistic outreach to watch a Super Bowl, don't just leave the TV running during the halftime. What? Are you crazy? You gather people together, you want to do it for a godly purpose, and then you're going to bring them together so that they can watch a striptease show? It makes no sense. Yet churches, sometimes they don't think through those things. Even worse yet, they may think that that halftime show makes their event authentic, gritty, real worldness. No. People don't need the church to promote immorality. They don't need the church to promote corruption. They don't need the church to identify so much with the street that they're willing to bring that to people. That's already coming at people enough in the world. The church doesn't need to gather people together for events to watch that kind of stuff. So if you're holding a Super Bowl event at your church, in your rec room at the church, great. Just tune the Super Bowl halftime performance off, because you know what it's going to be like. You know it's going to be degrading. It's going to be using women as sexual objects. You know, it's amazing how the feminists are really torn on this issue. They don't know what to think because they're conflicted. On the one hand, they claim that so-called sex workers, strip-tease artists, dancers at exotic clubs and so forth, they say that's empowering women. That's giving women the power to choose and make money on their own, and so on and so forth, on that one hand. But then on the other hand, they object to the objectifying women as sexual objects, okay? So which is it? Does it empower women? I don't think so. How does having a woman nearly naked dancing in a suggestive way, immodest and immoral, how does that empower women? It doesn't. It doesn't empower women. It empowers perverted men who are scumbags who go and watch that kind of stuff, who go to these strip bars, who go to these stage shows. They're the kind of scumbags that slip in money in the waistband of the dancers. That's what you're empowering. You're empowering those guys. You're not empowering the women who are being exploited often for their sexuality. So, and one of the things that was pointed out in some of the commentary afterwards was that the Super Bowl is known by law enforcement agencies as the biggest night for sex trafficking. There are women who are flown in to the location of the Super Bowl, flown in from out of state, women coming from California, women coming from New York, women coming from all over parts of the United States, flown in by their pimps to be there on site for the service of sexual pleasure of men. Sex trafficking, human trafficking. Some of them are going against their will. Some are coming, most of them, sadly, are coming of their own free will because they want to make money off the lust of men and you exploit their bodies. So this is a reality. Super Bowl Sunday is the biggest night for sex trafficking in the whole year. So what do you do to combat that? What does the NFL do to combat that, oppose that, to shut that down? What do? They throw a sex show at halftime. They exploit the sexual nature of women at their halftime show. Isn't that a terrible, awful message to send to the millions of people who are watching? Yeah, that's the corrupt culture we live in. So we need to be aware of this, and we need to not give 1 inch, not budge 1 inch. We need to not accept it at all. Don't just go along like that Fox News female commentator. Don't just affirm it out of politeness and out of being kind. No. Voice your objections. Say, this is awful. This is terrible. This is not what we're about. And then also pray that the Lord God sends a revival in this nation and the church so that this can be changed and turned the other way and go back toward holiness. And so we can live in a society that doesn't exalt this kind of filth on a regular basis. Hope that's been a helpful commentary. We'll see you back next week on another edition of Christ in Culture. God bless.